One of the most valuable lessons I've learned over the past decade in real estate is how essential it is to learn from the industry professionals. That's why I'm gathering professionals from across the country to share their experiences with you. This is a Gregerson's podcast, where experience and passion come together in the world of real estate. I'm Casey Gregerson, your host, and I'm very excited you're tuning into today's episode. As always, if you have questions for me or any of our guests, please reach out to me at casey@gregersonproperties.com. Now let's get started with today's podcast. All right, we're here with Anthony Warren from Integrity Homebuyers, man. Anthony, I'm excited to get into it today, talk about your story. I know you got a pretty interesting story of where you're at today and how you got there, and then what your future plans are. And I think it'll be really cool to share your story with other people who are thinking about becoming involved in real estate or whatever they might be, like whatever path they want to take. I'm really excited for you to be able to talk about your story. So let's just kick it off right there. Yeah, tell me about kind of growing up and what led you into real estate. You know your story the best, man. So you start. Tell me where do we start?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on and being able to kind of share my journey and where we're at. So we're located in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is a little bit outside of Nashville by about 45 or 50 minutes or so, kind of in the northwest direction. I'm not from this area originally. I grew up in Texas, and before I lived in Texas, I was born and spent some time in Florida. You know, I come from a pretty, it's at certain points in my life I transitioned. So, as a young child, my mom had left my dad pretty early in life, and I was probably still an infant or a toddler. And she ended up marrying a guy in the Marine Corps and had my brother and sister, following me. They ended up getting a divorce probably about the time I was 5. And up to that point, I always just knew that guy as my dad. I didn't know any different. I had his last name. And then I found out when they got a divorce that I had a biological father in Florida. And, I talked to him once on the phone, and I was going to spend the summer with him. And it was like 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, or my mom got a phone call. He had passed away in a car accident. And so,
wow.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I never got to meet my real dad, and I only had one conversation that I vaguely remember on the phone with him. I do remember, where I was at. I was in California at the time, and I remember vaguely the payphone that I was on talking to him, because that was, back in the early 90s, payphones were still a thing. And so, I felt pretty heartbroken at a young age. After my mom left, my brother and sister's dad had kind of a pretty rough childhood. I'd say I was pretty underprivileged for the most part. My mom was probably not the best example of a mother, and, did things her own unique way, and I can't fault her for it. It's not the way I would live my life, but, to be completely transparent, she was an exotic dancer into drugs and the nightlife and that sort of stuff. And so that eventually caught up with her and my brothers and sisters and I, which there's 5 of us. I'm the oldest of 5. We eventually got taken away by the state. My brother and sister, with her second marriage, they actually went back out to California to live with their dad, who was in the Marine Corps. And then me and my 2 youngest, brother and sister, we went to foster care, which was a pretty unique thing, and I kind of look at my childhood a lot as an adventure. And I've always kind of been a adventurous spirit of sorts. Always read books like Huck Finn and The Other Side of the Mountain, and all these books were like, it's just old school, exploration. And so I just always kind of looked at my life in the manner of like, hey, everything's just a big adventure. And really, one of my last memories before we got taken into state custody as children, we were actually, I didn't even realize it at the time, because again, I just thought we were camping, but we were homeless for about 8 months. Me and, my sister and my brother was actually born, and his first home was a tent in the middle of the woods in Florida. And so, looking back on it now, I know that was completely not normal, but it was life back then. We'd go once a week and take showers at a local truck stop and keep food in coolers and stuff like that. So I just thought we were camping, and I just always had like an affinity for camping and being outside. And so to me, it was like no big deal. And then looking back on it, I'm like, well, yeah, that's probably not the best environment to keep children in. And fortunately, after spending about 18 months or so in foster care, my grandparents, my mom's mom and her stepdad, they adopted the 3 of us from state custody. So we got to go live with them in Texas. And so I pretty much grew up from sixth grade all the way till the time I was about 25 or 26 in Texas before I ventured out and moved to a different state. So yeah, my childhood was kind of crazy, kind of adventurous. And I kind of look back on it now and I'm just pretty thankful. I look and I can say I've never really had anything just handed to me. But at the same point in time, like I'm very thankful for the things that I do have because of that now. So yeah, kind of a crazy point and a bunch of little turns and twists and a lot of adversity early on.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff. It's so many things to think about, but biggest thing is just your perspective and your reality, right? It was just your reality, and it's how you lived it. Didn't seem any different. It's fascinating. Even like before you mentioned went to were taken in by the state, that you were, like you said, you were camping and you were just excited to be camping and living it. I mean, yeah, it's all your perspective. You were happy, and it's just fascinating. So I'd love to keep going with it, man. Like, I know you've served in the military and then kind of got into it from there, but I'm curious, and I'm really excited how this all ties in and how you kind of draw from these experiences today.
Yeah. So, after my grandparents adopted us, they were pretty blue collar, hardworking people. So my grandpa, he drove trucks most of his life. And by the time we moved in, with them, he dispatched trucks for a living. So he worked for Goodyear, and then they transitioned to a handful of other companies throughout the years. And that's what he did. And then my grandmother was a phlebotomist. And she's always super proud of being a phlebotomist because she didn't make super good grades in high school, but she set her mind to, hey, I'm going to be a phlebotomist. I'm going to have the best grades. And I think, she used to always tell me she only made A's at phlebotomy school. And so I had kind of a strict upbringing with them. They're a couple generations older than me and my siblings, right? And so there's usually a kind of a disconnect. But even with that, my grandpa, they were like on the tail end of the Great Depression as kids. So, they looked at things a lot differently than most people do today. They didn't really believe in credit or utilizing credit. They knew it was important to have good credit, but like you couldn't persuade them that credit cards were a good thing. And they're not, to a certain extent, if you don't use them wisely. But, so I didn't learn a lot of things about financials and money and stuff like that growing up, much like most people now.
Yeah.
And so
many people out there in the world like that, but
yeah,
but keep going. It sounds like you changed yours.
so yeah, they were super hardworking. They were pretty strict on me. I had to maintain all A's and B's if I wanted to play sports or do any kind of academics in high school, which, it was tough for me. And looking back, I went to a real small high school, and my graduating class, I think, was 31 people, 31 kids. And so just with that, we didn't have a ton of opportunities like kids who go to some of these larger schools do. But I was real focused on playing football and, a couple other sports here and there. I did track. But again, my grandparents were super strict. So there were times during, my upbringing where I'm one of 17 kids on a football squad and I'm playing both sides of the ball. And I made a C on my report card, so my grandparents would make me sit out for 3 weeks. And so it was really tough, because when I was younger, I used to kind of lean on the fact like, oh, I'm not smart, I can't do this. And I had kind of a really shallow attitude about things, as far as like what I was really capable of. Now that I've been removed from school for, going on 14 or 15 years outside of college, I realized that maybe I was just disinterested in school, and I was interested in other things. And so it's, it wasn't a lack of me being a smart guy. It was just a lack of me having an interest in a lot of things. So that's the way I kind of look at it now. I do wish maybe I would have tried a little bit harder in high school, but I was really passionate about certain things, and I can't go back and change what I was passionate about or the things that I didn't enjoy. So, going back to growing up, I didn't really know what exactly it was that I was going to do, because it was still at the point in time where like college was kind of the big thing, but like I just didn't know how I was going to pay for college. I didn't know if I was smart enough to go to college at the time. And so my grandpa always told me, because I used to be kind of rowdy as a kid, he'd say, son, if you want to fight, go join the Army. And it just resonated with me. And I had a good buddy of mine that growing up, he and I were actually looking at joining the Army on the buddy program. And his mom was not having it. She was like, no, you're not going to the Army. And this is kind of, Iraq was still a thing and Afghanistan was a thing. So for a lot of folks, it was still kind of like real fresh and kind of a scary thing. And, but I didn't really know what else I would do in life. My dad, my biological father, he was in the Army, and then my grandparents on that side, my grandma and grandpa were both in the Air Force. And, I had a couple other family members that had been in the military, but really on my side of the family, like nobody had ever done it. So I was like, I'm just going to join the military. So when I was a junior in high school, there was a National Guard recruiter at my school, and he was like, hey man, you want to join the Army National Guard? And I was like, I don't know, man. He's like, well, we're giving $20,000 sign-on bonuses if you sign up. And I said, shoot, sign me up, man. $20,000 was a lot of money, and still is today. But so I signed up. I had to have my grandparents sign waivers for me, and literally 2 weeks later, I was at basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, for infantry basic training. And man, talk about scared, because I'd never really been outside of that small town in so many years since I was 10 or 11. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting on a plane and flying somewhere, and I'm getting yelled at by these guys, that are drill sergeants. And I was just super, super scared. But I came back and I finished my senior year, because I did the basic training between my junior and senior year. Came back, did my senior year, played football. And that October, my grandma passed away kind of unexpectedly. And so, it was kind of real tough on me. I was doing real well in school. I was super proud because I was finally having all A's and B's on my report card. And then when she passed away, I just kind of lost motivation. And so, I was lucky to be able to graduate with my class, but I also, I dropped the ball. I was pretty emotionally hurt when I lost her, because that was my mother figure at that point in life. So, and my grandma and I were so much alike that we used to just butt heads, and we were always competing against each other. And like I was a teenager, so I was kind of a jerk, like most teenage guys can be. So anyways, I was really thankful that even before she passed away, I'd seen her the night before and, spent some time loving up on her. And so I know that our relationship was in a really good place when she passed away. So again, that was just pretty tough for me to deal with, but made it through my senior year, ended up graduating like 28 out of 31. And I was like, man, I kind of feel like a big dummy. But again, it was just, I was so disinterested in so many things in school, but I knew that I wanted something different in life. And I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted something different. And so anyways, I spent the summer working. I worked for the school that I graduated from, doing some maintenance, and then also had a job. I got my first job when I was 16 at a local Sonic. And so I worked there. And I had 2 jobs over that summer before I went back and finished up some training for the Army. And I got back home from that training in October, and I went into the office to turn in all my paperwork. And they said, hey, before you leave, let me check something. So I go in the office, and I'm like, okay, sure. And as I'm getting ready to leave, the guy was like, hate to break it to you, but you're going to Iraq in 2 weeks. And I was like, you're kidding me, right? He's like, no, man, you got to be in Fort Worth in 2 weeks. They're going to send you back to Georgia, and then you're going to do a little bit of train up, and you're going to go to Iraq. And I was like, wow, man, I didn't think I was going to deploy, this fast, especially, everybody tells you in the National Guard, like, oh, they don't deploy, they don't do anything. And that was so totally against the grain and against what really happened. So
what year was that?
That was in 2008 that I finished high school. I graduated May of 08. And then I want to say it was like a week or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving of 08, I was in Iraq. I remember eating Thanksgiving dinner by myself in a foreign country. And I was just like shell shocked pretty much. So yeah, back in 2008.
Wow, man. Cool. So yeah, keep going with this. So I'm curious, like how kind of carrying me through the being in the forces, and then would you start kind of getting into real estate, but right after you got out of that? You got back from Iraq, or?
Yeah, not quite that early, but yeah, I'll kind of carry on with the story. But so I go and I do my first deployment. I come back, I think it was late September the following year in 2009. I kind of, my plan was to go to college because now I had a way to pay for college. The VA was going to help pay some of my way and college. And I just really was the first time being out on my own in life. And I had some buddies that moved into an apartment, and I was just kind of wild for about 8 or 9 months. Like, I did a lot of partying and a lot of dumb things, but it is what it is. And I made some kind of poor financial decisions and stuff like that. So, around early 2010, I was like, oh, I not only now have to be a college student, but I have to go to work because I'm broke. And so I got a job working at Lowe's, and then I ended up meeting the guy who kind of got me. He ended up eventually getting me into real estate. So I was always curious about real estate. In 2012, I got my real estate license, and I thought I was going to be an agent and go that route. And I was kind of excited, but I was also really scared because I was broke. And at that point in time, my wife and I had like no money. We lived out in East Texas, and she worked at a Family Dollar, and I was working at like a TCBY ice cream store. And I was a licensed agent, but I was afraid to commit to being an agent because like I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills if I'm not working every day, and I just didn't understand what it was ultimately going to take to hustle and go out and build relationships and do what successful agents are capable of. And so anyways, I had my real estate license, and that was 2012. And then in 2013, I ended up deploying again, but to Afghanistan this time. And so I go to Afghanistan, and it was one of the more life changing events in my life because there was some time that I saw just a lot of different things. Afghanistan is actually a really beautiful country in some places, but it's just overshadowed by all the violence there. And so, I saw a lot of things. The people are incredible over there and puts a lot of things into perspective of how fortunate and really how wealthy, like even some of the poorest people are in our country compared to people in other countries. I've seen, people in Afghanistan cut, hundreds or thousands of acres of wheat by hand and sift out the seeds in a very traditional manner of like throwing the seeds up in the air. The wind blows all the husk and stuff away, and the seeds just fall on the ground, and they bag the seeds up and then take them to go grind them. And that's pretty primitive if you think about it. And I saw probably an 80-year-old woman walking across pretty much an open barren land carrying 5-gallon jugs of water on her shoulders. And I'm just thinking like, man, these people really still live in the way they did in biblical times. Like nothing has changed for the most part. And so that kind of starts building some perspective. And really it was on that deployment where I had a lieutenant who he was with us, and some of my other leadership, they were like, hey, yeah, Corey Vines, he's making 30, 40, 50 grand a month. And I was like, no way. Like that does not happen. There's just no way he's doing that. And they're like, yeah, go talk to him. And I go talk to him like, hey, sir, some of the other guys are saying that you're making 30, 40, 50 grand a month. And frankly, I just don't believe it. And
Yep.
he was like,
Called him out.
yeah, he's like, well, I am. And he was super humble about it. And so we started talking, and he's like, well, you have your real estate license, right? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, man, when we get home from Afghanistan, you should come work for the company that I'm working with. And I'm not going to name their name, but they're a pretty large national wholesale company, and they've got offices everywhere. But the one that I was working out of eventually was in Dallas. And so anyways, he was working there, and ended up when we got home, he took over an office in Fort Worth. And so I went to go work for that company, and it's just straight hustle and grind, man. This is back in, I got home Valentine's Day of 2014, and I think I went to work for them in like March or April of 2014. And so like basically you show up and they kind of,
Hold on, I got to interrupt, but I want to hear it. But and we can cut this. But was it New Western?
no, it was
Oh, what's that?
Net Worth Realty.
Oh, Net Worth. Okay, gotcha. I knew the guys in Dallas Fort Worth and they were. Oh shoot, I just lost the name. I knew the New Western guys, but
Yeah.
I didn't know the name. Keep going though. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically working for those guys. We can cut that if you want.
Yeah, it's all good. So, anyways, I started working at the Dallas office, and my buddy, he went over to basically be the manager for the Fort Worth branch. And then he ultimately ended up going from Fort Worth to opening his own, I guess, franchise or office in San Diego. So, anyways, I was kind of exposed to wholesaling in that manner on a very large corporate scale. And at the end of the day, I said earlier, I was a small town kid and grew up in a town of like 700 people and a real small school. And just being in Dallas and being in that kind of environment for the first time in my life was very fast paced. And the culture was a lot different, just for me, like I said, I was just a simple small town kid, and I really didn't have the mindset back then to really understand like how monumental of an opportunity it was. And ultimately I was in the hiring process for a firefighting position in Mesquite, Texas. And I thought I'd gotten a job. So like the day of the final interview, I'd gone into the office there and I told him, I was like, hey, I don't know if I'm a good fit to work with you guys or not. I think I'm just going to leave the office and just cut ties with you guys. So I did, and I was kind of thinking I was going to be a firefighter, and all of a sudden the job was down between me and one other guy for the firefighting position, and they hired somebody else. And I was like, dang, now I don't have a job and I don't have any good prospects. And so I went to work for a construction company doing commercial construction, and it was kind of tough because kind of in that same time frame, I was still in the Army National Guard, so I was doing a lot of my military commitment on the weekends. And I entered into this competition called the NCO, or Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year competition. And so basically just every month it's this big competition, and there's all these events, and you'll go ruck march, 8 to 12 miles. You'll go and do runs. You'll do these obstacle courses. You'll take weapons apart, put them together, see who can do that the fastest. There's, oral boards where you're going to sit before a bunch of, first sergeants and sergeants major. And they're basically, it's just like a big interview, and they're going to grill you and you're going to mess up. And anyways, it's like month after month of doing that. And I want to say it was like a 3 or 4 month process. Well, I'd made it to the state level of competition, which in the state of Texas, it's like 20, at the time it was like 20,000, service members in the National Guard. And that also included the National Guard. And so I ended up finishing second out of, everybody in the state, which was a cool accomplishment. But I was really defeated because I made some mental mistakes that cost me, and I should have won. And so I was kind of like, I was not in a good place, like mentally, for a little bit. And then like right after that happened, I ended up hurting my back pretty bad. Just all the, the wear and tear and the ruck marching and the high impact of carrying that, the heavy pack on your back. I ended up herniating a couple of discs in my lower back. And so like I was super depressed, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. And I was working that construction job, and, there were days that I couldn't even move by the time I would get home. My body hurt so bad. And a lot of it just had to do with my lower back being in so much pain. So, fast forward a little bit, that company, I really liked, I liked the people in that company, but it was a small commercial construction company, and like there was going to be room for advancement if I would have stayed. There would be times where there were money issues, and we took on a couple bad jobs, and it looked as if they were going to close the company down. And so I got kind of nervous, and we just ended up saving for 3 or 4 months in a row, and we just said, hey, we're going to move somewhere different. And we had some family in Springfield, Missouri area, but we were also looking at Colorado because we love going out to the mountains and fly fishing and just kind of being outdoors. So we went to Colorado, and it was just as expensive as Dallas, and it just didn't feel right. And so we said, well, let's just move to Springfield, Missouri. And we did that in 2016. And then 2017, I deployed again for a third time. So I was still in the Texas National Guard, but I was traveling from Springfield, Missouri back to the Dallas Fort Worth area every month. and ended up going to Africa this time. So we went to Djibouti, Africa, which controls a pretty important port, on the eastern horn of Africa. And I was fortunate because I got to spend a month in Uganda kind of training some Ugandan soldiers, which is really an incredible experience. But that whole year, I kind of going into that deployment, I was just real tired. And I was like, I don't know. I was questioning God. I was like, God, why am I deploying again? I'm just real tired. I just wanted to be home with family. And so I was kind of bitter about it and I wasn't really in a good mindset. And I've made a goal to read more books. And one of the books that I downloaded on my Audible was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Well, I hadn't read it at all during the train up. And then, of course, flying overseas, you have like a 17 to 20 hour flight. And I said, well, I'm just going to listen to this book on the way there. And I'm pretty sure I finished the book by the time we made it to Germany, I think by the time we made it to Germany for our stop overseas. And I said to myself, I said, wow, I said, I haven't really been listening to what God has been trying to tell me, but now I know why I'm coming on this deployment, because ultimately I was a photographer, kind of in my, in between that job and everything else. So I was just kind of really making money as a side hustle with photography, and I enjoyed it, but I said, man, I can't earn a really sustainable living just doing that without seriously growing and really marketing myself just a ton more. So I listened to that book and I said, okay, I just need to find a way to get back into real estate. So that whole year I was gone, I probably listened to 400 hours of Bigger Pockets episodes at least. And then I was listening to other, real estate investing podcasts, and I was listening to financial type podcasts. And I was just really, really big into it. I was downloading a bunch of books. I know Brandon Turner has the book on rental property investing, and I ran in like how to be a landlord. And I talked to my wife and I said, hey, I think instead of us buying a house, because we had just gotten pre-approved to buy a home, I said, I think we should buy a duplex.
Nice work. So you got her bought in, got her read the book.
Yep.
That's key, is getting the buy-in from the partner.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things is that she's been very gracious to always follow my lead. And that's a hard thing to do. And it's something I don't see as common today, just where traditional marriage is, a 50-50 partnership, right? But she has always allowed me the flexibility to take these ideas and just run with them. So we ended up closing on our first duplex probably a month and a half before I got home from that deployment. So, she was tasked with all the, getting it ready and getting floors laid in it and painting it. And we had a tenant on the other side and kind of, just doing all these things that you would do as a first time investor. And so we lived in that. And before I got home, I had messaged a guy who I had thought was wholesaling at the time, because, after everything, I was like, well, I think I want to try wholesale. And anyways, I messaged him, and his name is Andrew Newland. He's actually a Premier member. And so I messaged him, and he told me that he said, yeah, we'll grab coffee. And then he just kind of blew me off. And whenever I got home, I hit him up again. I said, hey, man, let's go have coffee. And he didn't respond to me. And I hit him again and I said, hey, Lane, let's go get coffee. And he said, okay, we'll go grab coffee. And so I sat with him and didn't really understand at the point that he was going to be interviewing me. But, he just talked to me, and, I went home, and, he was like, well, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I hand wrote 150 letters that I sent out. He's like, really? He's like, good on you, man. He's like, well, what list did you target? I'm like, I don't know, man. I've just, I found some absentee owners and I just like sent them some mail. And he's like, oh, so you don't really have a plan of attack on it? And I was like, not a clue, man. I'm just trying to do what everybody says to do. And so, it was like a day or two later, he actually called me up and he's like, hey, man, what would you say if I offered you a position to come work for us? And I said, I'd be interested. I need to figure out if it's, the right fit. And, I'd love to meet up with you and your business partner again and see, really what it looks like. And yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to lose, and I had saved up a bunch of money, and due to house hacking now, like I had a pretty low cost of living. And so I figured I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, like there's no better time than now to take on, pay, a commission type position. So I met with them, and we all mutually agreed that I was going to go work for them in Springfield, Missouri. And I, came on as their acquisitions guy. And so they put me through all the sales training. I did the John Martinez sales training. We were a small team at that point in time. There were, I think, four of us or three of us. No, there were four of us. There was the two owners, and then there was a lead manager, and then there was me. And so I was going out and doing a lot of, a lot of the appointments and stuff.
Wow. So they were set up. Okay. So you said there are two owners. How do they work? Did they do acquisition and then dispositions, or how do they split up their company?
Yeah, so at that point in time, Andrew was doing a lot of the acquisition side of things, and his partner at the time, they're no longer together, but his partner at the time was doing a lot of the project management. He was also doing, a lot of the dispositions. And then the girl there that they had, she was basically just the lead manager. And it really gave me a unique opportunity to look into their business. And again, they were both, and Andrew is still a premier, a Collective Genius Premier member. And so it really gave me an opportunity to look into their business and understand every position within the company. And at one point in time, I think they had fired the girl who was the lead manager. And they told me, they said, they took me out to dinner one evening. They said, hey, we need you to start doing some lead management right now until we can get somebody else hired. And so all of a sudden I become, lead manager. I'm fielding calls. I'm scheduling my own appointments. I'm going on appointments. I'm getting deals locked up. I'm doing everything shy of dispositions for the most part. And then even then I would meet to do some dispo, just depending. But for the most part, that was handled, by Andrew and his partner. So Andrew really kind of took on the operations role and marketing role in the company, and I was just pretty much doing most all acquisitions. And then his partner was doing the project management and dispo stuff. So we had a pretty good system going for a small team, but now I think his team is built out to like 20 people, but they also do have another location. I think they invest in Lubbock. They have a partner in Lubbock, and then also, primarily in Springfield and around that area. So yeah, it gave me a unique perspective to be able to see how a professional wholesale company should operate, even on a smaller level. So
wow, so that's cool. So I love it because we talk a lot about like how do you get into real estate, but how do you like work jobs or get experiences to where you can get the experience and not necessarily have to do all the risk yourself and go start your own company, or sometimes people do it, have a W-2 job and do a side hustle, but also love the people that like find certain roles and certain jobs where they like learn the skills while they're getting paid, and then they're literally learning the skills of how to do it. So you did several things. You worked for a wholesaling company, well, multiple ones. You worked for one in Texas. Then you also started to work construction, and then it sounds like then you went to another one that was a little bit more kind of a smaller, they're a big company now, but like a smaller size company to where you were doing acquisitions. You got to do lead management. So you kind of had all the tools, huh? You were really learning the whole process.
yeah. And so, kind of fast forward, I kind of sensed that there was a little bit of, I don't want to call it hostility, but I could feel that there was tension within the company, and that tension kind of put some pressure on me. And then, really one of the biggest factors I left is kind of get a little vulnerable again. But while I was gone on that last deployment, my wife started having a lot of health issues.
Really?
Yeah, she was having, and she had a lot of stress on her, man. She was a full-time college student. She was working full-time for another company. And then, she was running the house and taking care of our animals. And she was just really busy and had a lot on her plate. And she started having issues where she would start like passing out and stuff like that. And I kind of got scared, and I didn't know if I was going to have to come home early. But she was having these issues and just like low blood pressure at times. Anyways, we didn't really know what was going on, but come to find out, she had actually gone into menopause like super early. I think she was 26, 25, 26, and she was she was already in menopause at that age, and which is super rare. And along with the menopause, she was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. So basically what that meant was that, it was going to be a challenge to try to have children. So these were a lot of things that we were figuring out after I had gotten home. And so we started looking at really what's the best way if we want to start a family. And we decided that like really our one of our only options was to do IVF or in vitro fertilization. But at that point, it was so expensive. We had gone to a clinic in St. Louis at the time, and it was like, I don't know, it was going to be like $30,000 or $35,000 out of pocket. And of course they've got loans and stuff that you can do, but it's still a big commitment, And it's not like I had a ton of money to go and say, well, we're just going to throw 35 grand at this, and so us wanting to do the IVF process, and then also that I had felt while I was at that company, and it wasn't from Andrew. Like I wasn't getting any negative pressure from Andrew at all. But a lot of that, it just weighed on me. And I said, I just asked Ashley, I said, well, what do you think if I can join active, cause I was still in the National Guard. And so she said, well, yeah, let's do it if that's going to help us get this procedure done. So in September of 2019, I joined active duty Army, and we had to move our life again. So, we kept our duplex there. I had to leave. That Andrew's company, and it's pretty sad because ultimately it gave me a lot of flexibility in my life, and I love the culture for the most part there. And Andrew was somebody even today who's like pretty instrumental in what it is that we do. And I got I feel stuck on, I can always go to him and talk to him and get his outlook on stuff. So anyways, we ended up moving to Clarksville, Tennessee in 2019, and immediately I got deployed again. And I was fortunate that it wasn't overseas. My unit got sent to the southern border in Texas, so I spent some time in Zapata, Texas, which is outside of Laredo, and
Yep.
we basically ran operations down there. For the we just ran operations down there to help secure the border. So there was a chance that I was going to get to come home a little early, and all of a sudden, COVID became a thing, and I literally got home March 15th, and that's kind of the day that like the world shut down. And so I flew home, and I knew at that point that I'd have a really good opportunity because I was going to be in charge of the people who stayed back, who didn't go to the border, which was like 15 people. So I knew I was going to have a really good opportunity that if I wanted to, I could start my business. So the whole time I was at the border in my spare time, I was, creating LLCs, and I was consulting people about how to best, approach my company and how I was going to market and how I was going to do these things and where to pull a list from and all these different things, right? How to skip trace some stuff. So ultimately I came back and I kind of had this plan in place, and all of a sudden COVID hits. And I'm like, man, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to be successful with my business. But I said, I'm going to try it. And I didn't have a ton of extra money, but I'll max this credit card out. And if the worst thing that happens is I max out $8,500, then I know I've got a job that I can pay it off with. And on top of that, we had just taken that loan, for the IVF procedure, and ultimately that procedure failed. So now we had this debt of, close to $30,000, and it's at like a 22% interest rate, and just crazy, right? So I was really at the point, I said, I need to try to do some wholesale deals to get some extra income into our house. So I was committed enough where I said, okay, I'll max out my credit card if that's what I have to do. And so I started real early. We started with text blasting. And, I think in total between text blasting and we did a lot of driving for dollars, that's where a lot of our first deals came from. And I want to say the first deal that we got, we wholesaled and made $6,500, but I spent like $4,200 in marketing and texting and all these other things, right? So our net basically on that was like $2,500 or 2,000 bucks. It wasn't a whole lot of money, but we knew that we had proof of concept, right? And I remember getting that first check, and even though it was not a huge amount of money, I cried. Like, we stepped out of the title company, I just was sobbing because it was there was a lot of emotions that just kind of come to, a head. And I was grateful. And I just said, well, I've got what it takes to do this. Right. Follow on to our next deal. We were just driving for dollars, and I found this property, and I called the guy, and he's like, oh, I don't think the house is worth anything, but if you want to buy it for the price of the land, you can. And I asked him, I was like, well, what do you think would be a fair price for the land? And he said, I don't know, maybe $20,000 or $25,000. So anyways, I put it under contract for $24,000 after kind of going back and forth with him. And I walked into the house. I said, hey, would you mind if I walked in the house? And he's like, no. And I realized that the house was actually in a really good spot between here and Nashville, where home prices were just skyrocketing. And then also the house was really in pretty good condition, a few major things, but like, a new roof and some other things. And so I said, well, I was really confident that I could wholesale this property. And then the more I started looking at it, the more I said, man, I bet I could wholesale this thing for $100,000 if I wanted to. And, I had a couple of other companies come out and look at it because I thought I was just going to like wholesale it to like another big company. And they like lowballed me real bad. And then I had another guy who was an investor here in Clarksville. He was also in the Army. And I said, hey man, you've been investing a little bit longer than I have. Would you want to come walk this deal and just tell me what you think? So we walked the deal, and by the time we get done, he's like, well, how much do you want for this? And I really had no intention of selling him the property. I really just wanted to get his feedback. And he said, what do you want for it? And I said, well, would you do $85,000? And he said, yes. And I was like, crap, I should have put it out for high. So, our second deal, netted us like $62,000. And that really kind of propelled us into being able to do more marketing and, just try things and figure out what we were good at. And, our first year, I think we closed 7 deals and it grossed like $104,000. And I was like, holy crap, we're rich. I just had really no sense of really how big it could be. And then I was still in the Army full time. So like I was doing this as basically a side hustle. And then I said, well, if I want to be really successful at this, I don't know that I can split my time between the Army and doing this. So I started to think like, what would it look like if I got out of the Army and I lost my income? Because I was making about $6,000 a month, which is pretty decent, for a W-2 job. And I said, well, how do I replace that? And I said, well, now that I've got a little cash, maybe I stop wholesaling and I start keeping some. And so I kept, I think 4 properties in 2021. And, I still did some wholesale deals, but I bird those properties and I was able to buy them really cheap. And, most of them are, refinanced now. And I was able to pull a wholesale fee basically out of the backside of it. And then I think their leverage point is only, 50% of ARV even right now. So, they cash flow super well. I'm not over leveraged on any of them, and I was still able to burr them and pull out some money to pay myself. So really a great experience, and it taught me a lot about managing projects, what it was going to really take, and it helped me button up my, whenever I went into a house for a wholesale, what it was going to cost to truly fix something, which I think is a really underrated skill for a lot of wholesalers who just don't know what things are going to cost. So it gave me a really good opportunity to learn just the craft of investing in real estate in general.
Man, that's good stuff. Yeah, I love how you got into it, started taking down deals. I mean, you're like you just said, when you got into like how you like that first check, I think because a lot of people could relate to that. Like your back a little bit was against the wall, right? You're like, hey, I kind of went all in. I went all into my credit card. You already had some other debt, and you were coming in up right on COVID and a lot of uncertainty in the world at that time, right? But you went forward. I mean, what gave you the confidence to just go forward and pull the trigger?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is that I knew I had the ability to go into a house and be a high functioning individual with sales on the sales side. So I knew based on my experience with, working for Andrew's company that I could go in and I was more than capable to go in and have those sales conversations and close deals. I also was very confident because I had the experience of answering phones and scheduling appointments as well, of doing those same things. So it wasn't anything that I hadn't done before. So I knew that as long as I could market correctly and I could go out and just hustle, I was confident in my skill set the rest of the way to be able to go out and, put deals under contract and negotiate good prices on them. And so for me, it was like I just didn't feel like there was any other option at that point. Like I had to succeed. And that's kind of goes back to a lot of my military career. Like I've never looked at my military career and been like, oh, I can't do this. I've always gone into it with like, hey, this is a no fail situation. So I have to be able to go into that situation and just be successful, or really just like failure just not being an option. So it was one of those things. I just knew my skill set matched up well, and I had done it before. I just hadn't done it for myself. So that's kind of what really propelled me into 2020, 2021, and then started doing some flips. Ultimately found my way into the Collective Genius Select group where I met you guys at, and that's even helped our business tremendously since joining last May. So we did pretty decent last year. I think our goal was to do 35 deals, and relatively in our market, I think our county has like 188,000 people ish. And I really only try to run appointments within 35 to 40 minutes of my house. That may change once I get some more people on the team. But for me to be as efficient with my time, I know really what my buy box is, and I know how far I need to go out. So with that being said, we fell a little short of our goal last year. I think we ended up doing 20 deals, but every year we've been in business, we've almost doubled in our gross revenue. And so really this year, my goal is to get to 40 deals, and that's bigger than last year's goal. But things that have changed is we hired a lead manager. So she, CG, like I was getting to a point where I was doing everything with our income as far as operating expenses and, flipping houses. And so like really ate into our operating expenses and our inbound cash flow. Well, I, went and opened several HELOCs, and now I've got the flexibility to work projects out of those HELOCs, turn around and either sell them or refinance them and pay that HELOC back down. And that's something that I wouldn't have known really to pursue without the community of the Collective Genius. So there's a ton of things that, I've learned, and I feel like we're really just set up this year to skyrocket. And I'm super excited. I'm learning how to grow a team and be a leader outside of the Army, which is because being a leader in the Army is a little bit different than being a leader inside of a flying organization. So those are things that I'm really focused on: growing the team, just all these things that a healthy, professional, mature business, needs to do, and kind of where everybody strives to be and get to. So.
Man, cool. So yeah, to kind of maybe wrap up and kind of go full circle on this. If you talked about your journey, how you got there, how you work different jobs to kind of get some of the experience and get kind of the reps while you're working for other people. Then you had a chance to go do it yourself, and then you surrounded yourself with masterminds, other people who knew way more than you. So always leveraging your resources and other people. But what would you say today? So today, as you kind of move forward, knowing all the things you went through, kind of growing up, like how does that kind of shape how you really show up every day, and really how you probably take resilience into real estate every day?
Yeah, I look at it this way, right? Because there's a ton of challenges on a daily basis with any business, right? But especially this one, because you're not only trying to solve the problems within your organization, but when you're working with home sellers, you're really trying to help them solve their problems too. And so I think one of the things I've really learned and relied on is one, just being a complex problem solver, but also even past that, I would just say having a never quit attitude. Like quitting is so easy, and it crosses my mind, right? I know it crosses everybody's mind, but at the end of the day, it's like quitting is easy. And I look at it, I'm like, just where we are, over our short, almost 3-year period is like, would me in 2020, would I be proud to be in the position I am today? Or would quitting be the better option? What would I think of myself if I made it this far really just taking massive, consistent action. And I think a lot of times I have to look at it and just say, hey, it's not about the destination, but it's more about the journey of the things that I have to do to get there. And I know that as long as I do the same amount of consistent action that has got me to this point, some of the things are going to change along the way. But as long as I'm taking action, I'm consistent, I'm going to continue to blow past these targets that I've got. And it may not seem like they're attainable right now, but I mean, if you do something for 10 years, man, you can be an expert in that industry in 10 years time. So it's just about getting to a point where you can finally be an expert and then still evolving and continuing to grow and understanding that, like, hey, I'm just not going to quit, and being relentless in that pursuit.
Man, that's good stuff. I think it's inspirational. I think it's for anybody to hear that, whether they are like want to get started in real estate and haven't started, or whether they're maybe in the middle of it, or maybe they're like struggling right now because of what's happening with interest rates and maybe in the market, and they're thinking, hey, maybe I should give this up. But I think your resilience and your story should be inspiration for those people.
Thanks.
Really cool stuff, Anthony.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Well, we'll kind of wrap it up. Any other kind of thoughts? We typically go about an hour, man, but you've been giving us really, really good perspective and just a neat story. Anything else you would kind of want to share with people about anything you want to add to all that?
Yeah. I mean, I think to sum it up is, like, if you're interested in what it takes to do wholesaling, there's a ton of resources out there, a ton of free resources. I would just say, like, latch onto the one or two things that you can focus on and really utilize, and just don't try to reach for too many things. Focus on one to two things and be good at those one to two things, and just know that there's plenty of people out there who will help you. And maybe you're not going to be able to start your own wholesale company. Maybe you can, but a good entry point is to find somebody doing deals and see what they need and help them do deals. And
mm-hmm.
That's a really good entry point, and it's a really good way to learn, and it's a really good way to leverage somebody else's experience for your time, which is always going to be the biggest struggle, is balancing your time versus experience. So if you can leverage, somebody else out, but you're also benefiting them, that's a really, really great way to get into the business in general. So past that, I've got a point to speak at 5 local real estate investing groups. I've already got one on the board, and then another goal was to do 10 podcasts. So if anybody else sees this and they want to connect and they have a podcast, I'd love to hop on their podcast as well. So this is 1 out of 10. So I've got 9 more that I want to knock out this year. So that is something that I'm looking to do. I'm trying to make a better point to be more consistent on social media. So you can follow me at Anthony Warren on Facebook, or on Instagram. I've got a handle. I think it's doors_2_freedom. And you can connect with me on there. I need to do better about posting on that. It's just, there's only so many hours in the day. But I'm going to make it a bigger point moving forward to really step up my presence. And I really want to help people and grow people, because I just see so much value in freedom, the possibility of having, financial freedom. And if I can do it, and I can beat a lot of the odds and statistics that I face in my life, because statistically, based on a lot of my experiences, I should, and not to sound morbid, I should be dead or in prison. And that's just like a stat, based on a lot of people who enter a state program like foster care or whatever. And then also all the deployments and all these things I've been exposed to, like I'm fighting against a lot of odds. And so if I can do it, anybody can do it. It takes some grit. It takes being determined. And again, just not quitting. But I love to talk to people. And so if somebody wants to reach out and connect, like, feel free. I'd love to take that time, and maybe you can help me out with something, or maybe I can help you get started. Whatever that looks like, I'm happy to connect with people.
Man, that's good stuff, Anthony. I was about to ask where people can find you, so thanks for answering that. And man, I hope you inspire other people too, that maybe it had a similar situation, or maybe they're in a similar situation, listening to a podcast, and can get inspiration to push through. And as you said, like, lot of reasons why, ton of reasons why you shouldn't be where you're at today, but you've worked through those, persevered, and it's cool stuff, man. I think it's inspiring.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Again, thank you guys so much for allowing me to share my story and kind of where I started out and where I'm at today. And again, I don't ever know that I'll get to this ultimate goal of success, but I will if I just keep working, right? So I don't know what my ultimate definition is. I think it's just always going to be this moving target, but like define what that looks like for you and just enjoy the process, So, but yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm super excited for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We appreciate you coming on, and yeah, that was a great little tidbit, a little bit of advice for people to take that next step and go for it. Love it. Well, cool, Anthony. Thanks for coming on.
Yep, absolutely.
As you may have learned by tuning into this episode of Gregor Sense, the easiest way to make real estate investing hard is by going at it alone. So as you continue learning and seeking knowledge of the industry, I want to encourage you to build relationships with other professionals who are passionate about real estate. Whether that's an agent, a business owner, or a managing investor like myself, there are pros that want to see you succeed and are willing to help you by sharing their experience. You can always reach me by visiting CaseyGregerson.com and scheduling a call. I look forward to connecting with you and continuing to share my experience with you here on Gregor Sense Mobile. Until next time, I'm Casey Gregerson. Thanks for tuning in.